Passion project for its star, Stanley Baker, who saw it as a chance to pay tribute to his Welsh roots, Zulu is an epic war movie in the truest sense. Directed by Cy Enfield, this is a movie based on actual events that took place in the late 1870s, which centred around Rorke's Drift, a British missionary station and supply depot located in Natal, South Africa. The central conflict resulted in 32 British casualties, including dead and wounded, while Zulu casualties were roughly 851. So we're introduced into the film by a pair of missionaries who are on hand to educate us on what a proud and noble people the locals are.
You must understand these things if you're going to stay in Africa, Margareta. That's why I brought you here. They are a great people, daughter.
However, when they find out that a nearby British force has been decimated, they have to hightail it back to their station, which is located close to Zululand, where the native maintains a large warrior class, and they're on their way. With over 4,000 Zulus nearby, they realise that it's only a very small matter of time before they find themselves under attack. So they set about preparing in the best ways that they can, but soon find themselves in disagreement as to how best to defend themselves. Inevitably, the Zulu forces move in and a massive 12-hour battle kicks off. The film does a good job of establishing a great deal of tension before the warriors inevitably arrive midway through. And when they do, it kicks off an on-screen battle that remains mostly unrivaled, even in today's CGI-assisted carnage. We'll get to that half of the film in a minute or two, but first, this cast. So after receiving the not-so-great news that the majority of British troops have been slaughtered, British Lieutenant Shard, who's played by Stanley Baker, and Bromhead, played by Michael Caine, who was stationed at Rorke's Drift to help with the engineering of a bridge, soon realise that the 140 or so soldiers under their command are in deep trouble. So after a decade in the acting business, this was Sir Michael Caine's first major leading role, and it's initially quite odd to hear his upper-class accent rather than his famous Cockney delivery. Caine's Lieutenant Bromhead is the typical stiff-upper-lip sort of Brit. He takes pleasure in mentioning how he comes from a long line of military heroes.
You know, my father was at Waterloo.
He was?
He got his colonelcy after that.
Did he?
And my great-grandfather, he was the Johnny who knelt beside Wolfe at Quebec.
Well, this was really a breakthrough role for Caine, a meaty leading role after a decade doing TV work. Here he comes across as an arrogant smart-ass, reluctant to accept his fellow lieutenant's plans and opinions.
You didn't say a single word to help Bromhead.
Oh, when you take command, old boy, you're on your own. The first lesson the general, my grandfather, ever taught me.
That fellow officer being Lieutenant Shard, played here by Stanley Baker. Baker also produced the film, and out of the two of them, he's the one with the brains who, thanks to his engineering background, has the common sense to come up with some strategies that just might work and save some lives.
Sergeant, put 2 good men on that hill. Tell them to keep their eyes peeled.
Mr. Bromhead, sir?
Double up, damn it!
Carry on, Sergeant Windridge. There's a good fellow.
Sir.
The rest of the cast here is essentially a roll call of 1960s acting talent, with support from actors such as Patrick McGee as Dr. Reynolds, who's tasked with dealing with the horrendous injuries sustained in battle. And having gone to a lot of trouble to get himself into the infirmary, Private Hook is played here by an hilarious James Booth. Hook resists taking part in the fighting until given no choice. My personal favourite here is Nigel Green as the strong, unflappable Colour Sergeant Bourne, showing how good old-fashioned British Army discipline pays off as he's constantly averting panic in the ranks.
Mr. Whitser, be quiet now, will you? There's a good gentleman. You'll upset the lads.
Also of note is the voice of none other than Richard Burton, bookending the film with his solemn narration.
In the 100 years since the Victoria Cross was created for valor and extreme courage, beyond that normally expected of a British soldier in face of the enemy, only 1,344 have been awarded.
So after we do get all the characters in the right place and the film has drummed up sufficient tension, seeing those Zulu warriors finally line the horizon as far as the eye can see and start chanting their death cries, it's a pretty impressive sight. We get to see real terror in this small handful of British soldiers, and it's quite refreshing to see the actual fear that they're feeling as their guns are trembling at the sight of these angry warriors. Thrown in the mix are the aforementioned missionaries, an alcoholic doctor played by Jack Hawkins and his repressed daughter, the lovely Ulla Jacobson. The pair interfere with the defence preparations and spread defeatism and religious panic amongst the Drift's relatively tiny gang of soldiers.
Death awaits you! You have made a covenant with death, and with hell you are in agreement. You're all going to die. Don't you realize?
So once the Zulus make their initial charge and the battle begins, the action pretty much never lets up, and the momentum only lifts when the fight finally comes to its standstill. The film's director Cy Enfield never really made a better movie than this, although he did a good job on the following year's Sands of the Kalahari, another project with Stanley Baker. Here he stages mass carnage with multiple characters, and he uses over 700 extras, most of which were actually descendants of the warriors who fought in the real battle. Interestingly enough, for what must have been an unimaginably violent fight, here it's quite a comically bloodless affair, with death by close-range gunshot and spear being represented by mostly playground theatrics. Using specifically developed lightweight camera cranes, Enfield bravely filmed on location in apartheid South Africa at the spectacular Drakensberg Mountains. Interestingly, all the scenes in the infirmary were filmed in Twickenham Studios in the UK, so actors such as James Booth as Huck didn't travel to South Africa to film anything at all. One of the things that's great about Zulu is that it's sheer good old-fashioned cinema. It does have its shortcomings. I mean, the entire first half is a little bit of a mess of cliches and racial stereotypes, which kind of reflect both the time of the film's release and the period it represents. It's a bit difficult to hold it against the rest of the film, which pulls off an entire second half of non-stop violent action in the way that doesn't really get dull or repetitive. What I did find interesting is the way that music is barely used throughout the film, especially in the battle scenes, which are basically soundtracked by the Zulu warrior chants and gunfire.
At will!
Zulu's an interesting film to kind of constantly look back upon, not just because it showcases some great technical achievements in filmmaking, but because it shows us that we never really learn our lessons in relation to geopolitics. Here we have a group of British troops who are all truly believing in the fact that they're bringing civilization to Africa and bettering the country, and they're ultimately surprised when the natives resist to the point of a bloody war. Coming to cinema screens 85 years to the day after the events of Rorke's Drift, on its initial release in 1964, Zulu was a colossal box office hit. It played in cinemas for the next decade before finally making its way to television to become a bank holiday staple ever since. If you've never seen it, you've surely seen bits of it if you've ever channel surfed on a Sunday afternoon. But go check it out.
Hughes?
Yes, Colour Sergeant.
Say, sir. Officer on parade?
Ah!